Today's program is about Prohibition, but because we're the Larchmont Historical Society, a rather Larchmont-centric organization, we are going to be focusing on Prohibition as people in Larchmont might have experienced it, understood it, heard about it, based upon records that I've unearthed about what actually happened in Larchmont during the Prohibition years. And so with that, I will proceed. I want to start back a bit before Prohibition to give you a little bit of perspective about something important in our community. And this Dee will remember. Colonel Charles McKnight Lesser lived at the Manor House in the 1890s. And he was the publisher of Bonfort's Wine and Spirits, which was published from 1871 to 1919. It was published in the city, but he lived in Larchmont for some of the time, and his sons published it. And he graduated from West Point. He fought at Bull Run. He was actually placed in charge of the company of soldiers on the north side that were comprised of volunteer firefighters in the New York City and surrounding region, which had the reputation, if we're talking about Prohibition, of being rather rowdy, frequently inebriated, difficult to supervise. I mean, they really, I think in some respects, there was articles about New York regretting when they came back. But in any case, here is Bonfort's Wine and Spirit newsletter. And what I want to point out is that he had, and he published, you'd think that he was a great proponent of liquor, and of course he was. His newsletter was basically the resource for wine and liquor retailers all across the country. And this was a Larchmonter. But let's listen to what he had to say about saloons. Saloons are a stench in the nostrils of society and a disgrace to the wine and spirit trade. How then shall we defend the average saloon? We answer, don't defend it, condemn it. This confession is a fair description of the saloon. It is a moral leper and social reprobate in any community. It is gross, obscene, vulgar, and profane. It is the home of gamblers and other criminals and the resort of prostitutes. Its decorations are immodest, indecent, and suggestive. With these facts before us, there is no middle ground, no room for compromise or sentimentalism, and no basis for a compromise. It is a place of unadulterated evil. It cannot be made respectable. It must go. Now, this is a Larchmonter speaking to the nation. And very much a part of the movement of Prohibition, even though he was of course in favor of excellent wines and excellent liquors, but he was very much opposed to the amount of inebriation that occurred in the United States. Now the next slide, a little, yes.
I'm just curious. So were bar restaurants popular, or was it just saloon or restaurant? Did alcohol get commonly served in restaurants, or was that a later? Because I don't think
alcohol was pervasive before Prohibition. I mean, the amount of drinking that went on in the United States per capita was remarkable. And so I'm sure that with restaurants, without restaurants, beside restaurants, in front of restaurants, there was lots and lots of drinking.
Okay,
we'll see a little bit later several references to the hose company. And this was a little bit of news about what we did last week. We had the reception for the Fire History's Historical Fire Company. And this is the uniform of the Historical Fire Company is the uniform of Charles Lesser's soldiers, the marching uniform of his soldiers in the Civil War, which was then the inspiration for Larchmont Hose Company, one of the 4 fire companies, for its marching uniform. And in this picture, you can see This mural we unveiled last week because we restored it. It was originally painted in 1948 by Mimi Genuine, who was the wife of C. Paul Genuine, the renowned sculptor whose work is displayed you can see it all over the Department of Justice in Washington. Anyway, this was then first restored by Mary Hargrave, one of our Historical Society's members' mother. And then when the Village Hall was renovated in around the 2000, this was actually ripped off the hall and it was put in a trash bin. And one of the hose company members preserved it, and now the Historical Society has restored it, and this was the restoration. And so you're seeing Lesser's hose company uniform, but you'll hear about the hose company some more in a minute. So, in order to understand what happened in Larchmont, it's important to understand the general chronology of Prohibition. So it says 1971, I mean 1917. There was a law passed during toward the end of the World War I, basically which it actually made it illegal to use grain for any kind of alcoholic beverage, with the argument was that the grain was needed to feed the troops, it was needed to feed the starving millions in Europe, and so that it was immoral to do this. And so there was only a 30% reduction in the use of grain that was actually implemented at the time, but this was the beginnings of Prohibition. Then 1919, we had the 18th Amendment approved. The Volstead Act was the federal law that implemented it. Then 1920, it went into effect. 1929, the punishments were enhanced. 1933 was the first step in eliminating it. What they did was to change the law so that beer could be 3.2% rather than no more than 0.5%, which was really hardly beer. And then on December 5th, 1933, it was repealed by the 21st Amendment, yes.
How was the 21st Amendment adopted?
It was adopted by the states.
By
the individual states. They had a period of time to do it, and I'll show you, in a slide coming up, I'll show you all the states that did it. Yes?
In 1917, was that true about the grain, or was it just puritanical? Or was it both puritanical and...
Well, you mean, was this accurate that you needed the grain for the soldiers?
Well, I'm guessing that it was, but I mean, was part of puritanical?
Well, it's, I guess there'd be two sides to the argument, but Herbert Hoover, who was in charge of administering the agency, when given the authority to eliminate 100% of it, chose to eliminate 30% of it. And I think his rationale was that that was all they could ship to Europe. And so there was no point in that they would get around to doing it more, but immediately they could do that.
Is that when the Seagram Company moved to Canada?
Well, around then, I don't know, but yes, the Seagram Company made their big... Now, we'll deal with several speeches by ministers, but I think you really can't talk about Prohibition without recognizing Reverend Billy Sunday, because he really articulated one of the other rationale for Prohibition, which was that it was going to mean that our factories would be more productive because people wouldn't be drunk, and that families would be held together. So his statement was, the reign of tares is over. The slums will soon be a memory. We will turn our prisons into factories and our jails into storehouses and corn cribs. Men will walk upright now. Women will smile and children will laugh. Hell will be forever for rent. I mean, that was a ringing endorsement of what we expected from Prohibition. And now you asked about the states. These are the states that actually voted for Prohibition. And you'll note that there's this cluster of states, New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Vermont, that didn't. And actually, Mayor LaGuardia later on made a big thing of this, that his perception was that the resources to investigate and enforce prohibition were focused on the punishment of the states that didn't vote for it. And that he would show statistically that per person and per mile and per this, that, and the other thing, we were getting all of the enforcement, in these other states that voted for it weren't really getting, you know, they weren't sort of entrusted to be wise enough to know not to do it. So we then have here, just to get a sense of what Larchmonters might have heard, this is a part of 2 paragraphs from a New York Times editorial in 1920. And as usual, the New York Times, you know, sometimes gets it right. And basically their observation was that the Volstead Act, by defining an intoxicating substance as anything more than 0.5%, really took the intention of the public in passing the Prohibition Amendment and warped it into something that was an instrument of the most extreme anti-liquor, anti-saloon league people. And they predicted that by doing that, that the enterprise was going to become unenforceable. And that what they've done is to stretch the amendment beyond the point where the public will sustain it, and has manufactured many sorts of technical violations which men of sober lives regard as offensive and pettily tyrannical. And so they ultimately say the Volstead Act is stirring a public sentiment that will make the enforcement it provides, and perhaps even proper enforcement, more and more difficult, and maybe finally impossible. And I think that turned out to be true. So let's look at the rules that Larchmonters had to live within. There's a lot of them, but the basics, basics are that you can drink liquor in your own home or in the home of a friend when you're a guest. You can buy intoxicating liquor when you have a bona fide medical prescription of a doctor. And so, you know, this is what we offered you when you came in. And you may consider any place you live permanently as your home. And if you have more than one home, you can have liquor in all the different homes. You can keep liquor in a storage room or club locker. You can move liquor when you change your residence. You can manufacture or sell or transport liquor for non-beverage or sacramental purposes. And so you could acquire liquor for the purpose of a religious observance. And in fact, there was one reference to one of the agents complaining about the sacramental liquor situation and saying that he'd apprehended Rabbi McGuire, who had basically created a very, very large synagogue and was thereby providing them the services that they needed. Anyway, you can see there's all sorts of don'ts. You can't carry a hip flask. You can't take liquor into hotels. You can't buy or sell formulas or recipes. You can't ship liquor. All sorts of things that you can't do. And then liquor was defined as anything that was more than 0.5% alcohol. So,
I just have a question.
Sure.
Where could you buy liquor then? I mean, was it just
I'll
with the doctor
wait and see. Wait and see. I'll tell you all about it. So, how alcoholic beverage can be legally acquired? You asked the question and I answered it. You could have liquor in your home, which you acquired before Prohibition started. So before Prohibition started, there were like endless trains coming in from Canada. I mean, they're just huge. It was like last call. And the volumes of liquor that were sold were astounding. And people then created large, just like what people have to do when you join Costco. You need to have a place to store all the stuff that you buy. People had to make room in their basements for all the liquor that they bought, because this might be the last, they didn't know what they would see. And so as a result, you do have lots of homes with large liquor storage areas in the basement. And sometimes these are perceived to be possible speakeasies, but you didn't need to have a speakeasy to do that. You would do it simply because you were storing your liquor. Now, again, the bona fide medical prescription, liquor for non-beverage purposes.
What is that, cooking? What is a non-beverage?
Well, an industrial purpose. And I'll explain in a minute about that. Liquor for sacramental purposes, provided you have a permit. And this is an interesting one. This is true. Home brew, a beer or wine, up to 200 gallons per year per family. Now, I mean, think of this. I mean, people would be, everybody in the family would have to be choking this stuff down in order to be able to drink 200 gallons of beer. In 1917, the United States consumed 70 million gallons of wine. In 1925, the United States consumed 150 million gallons of home-brewed wine. I mean, we knew how much grape had been shipped that was obviously for this purpose. And so we could figure that the amount of wine that was being produced for consumption in people's basements was considerably more than the amount of wine that they bought when they would just go to the store. Now, the first picture there is Stroh's malt syrup. This is a syrup which, when you add the right things to it, turns into beer. And so you would go to one part of the store and buy the syrup, and another part of the store and buy the other stuff, and then go home in your basement, put it together, and in a little while you would have your beer. And then this is Patty's Market in New York City, which was in the lower, I believe the lower west side, but and this is, it's hard to see, but basically this was where the grapes came in from California. And the amount of grapes that were shipped from California vastly exceeded the amount of grapes that they actually used to make wine before Prohibition. They were just shipping out tons. There was a huge production of grapes for people to make wine. Now, with your, this is up here is the little prescription. Now, let's say you were a Larchmonter and you got a prescription to buy to be able to have some liquor. Well, what might you have? Well, S.S. Pierce was the wholesaler to the drugstores, so Hugh's Drugstore would have been able to contact S.S. Pierce and order up any of these liquors, and then those could have been what you would have in order to meet your medicinal needs. Now, I mean, there's no attempt to, like, you know, you'd think they might say that this is arthritic gin, and that this is a headache wine, and, you know, they would try to make it at least seem to be some kind of a medicinal purpose. But no, this is absolutely California brandy, you know, New England rum, California port and sherry, rare old Jamaica rum. Now, you needed the rare old Jamaica, I'm sure, because of your gout. You know, I mean, but there was absolutely nothing. It's completely transparent that this was to provide excellent wine and liquor for people because they could get the little ticket. Now, how did all this illegal stuff get to us? Well, of course, the legal stuff got to us in the usual ways. I mean, you could get grapes at Colonial Market. You could, it was the food store during Prohibition in Larchmont. You could get that Stroh's beer stuff at Colonial Market. But how does the illegal liquor come in? And one big way is trains from Canada. Basically, in Canada, you could send a train through into the United States as long as it had an ultimate destination of a ship that was bound for someplace outside of the United States. So typically, it would be destined for a ship. There was an operation in Cuba that would fake the receipt of anything that you needed to claim was received. And so basically the train would proceed in Canada, and somewhere along the way, the train would become empty, and then they would get a receipt. They probably wouldn't even send the train or even bother with the boat. They would just get the receipt from Cuba and show that it had been received and properly sent off to wherever or consumed or whatever. And that was that. So trains coming in from Canada were a ready source, and someone, you mentioned Seagram's, they were the big producer of all kinds of liquor that came in from Canada on these trains that would just be offloaded as it went through. Conversion of industrial alcohol. You could get industrial alcohol, and then you would chemically process it to take out the additional chemical that made it poisonous. And so it would basically be depoisoned, and so it was capable of being consumed, and then it would be mixed with anything, like mix it with orange juice, mix it with anything, you want, and then sell it as an alcoholic beverage. And so that was a second way that you could get alcoholic beverages. Then we had the ships on Rum Row. Now this line, this is the East Coast, right up in the elbow there is New York City. And so this is the 12-mile limit. And at the 12-mile limit, they were basically, it was a floating warehouse. There were large ships with all kinds of liquor from Europe and from Canada that was out there, and it was basically, they would just go back and forth, and sometimes the ships would then go back to Europe, get some more, and come back. But then the rum runners were the very, very fast boats. And they were the boats. In fact, there was an article in the Brooklyn Eagle about a manufacturer of the boats that he basically had one line where he produced the boats for the Coast Guard, and then he had another line where he would produce them for the rum runners. And basically every time he would produce a new model, he could say to the other side, well, look, they've got it. Now you're going to have to speed your, step up your game, or you won't be able to catch them. But basically the rum runners were these very fast boats that would then take the liquor from Rum Row and then take it into wherever they were going to go. And we'll see some of that happening in Larchmont. And then there's diversion of legal sources. Particularly, I would say, the Sacramento wines. Bolo Vineyard is a famous vineyard that specialized in wine for churches. And basically, the amount of wine that they produced, they became a major, major producer of wine after Prohibition because the demand increased so much. And of course, this was because people, having experienced the wonderful transformational effect of Prohibition, now were attending Mass more often, and therefore they were consuming more wine.
Did church attendance go up?
No. Well, it depends. If you ask Rabbi McGuire, he would have an answer for you. But there basically, a lot of legal sources could be diverted into unintended directions. So let's wind our clock up to 1923, and where Prohibition has been going on for a while. And Reverend Russell at the Larchmont Avenue Church decides to give a sermon about Prohibition. It's a very long sermon. He was not a short-winded person. And so he had quite a bit to say about the fact that Prohibition had worked out, in the sense that the idea was that the stores would be empty and that the economy would collapse. And he said that that's not happened. The stores have been taken up by other businesses and so on and so forth. But he says, we are all within speaking distance of flagrant violations of law and order. It is reported you can buy liquor in Larchmont on both sides of the railroad. You know where, as well as I do, because citizens buy it and the trade continues to exist. Disrespect for law let alone ordinary decency of life, will reap the whirlwind of moral collapse in the generation to come. I mean, he was really scolding the parishioners of the Larchmont Avenue Church that basically the problem with Prohibition wasn't the law, it was the people. And that the people were just lacking in the moral discipline to, comply with the law. And he thought that this was going to be a terrible thing for our society and that Larchmont was going to pay a price. So let's start looking at some places. This is one that I think sort of tugs my heartstrings. This is the Chatsworth House, which was sometimes called Chatsworth Inn, and later it became known as the Larchmont Lodge.
Where was that?
It was opposite the railroad station. I think I have another.
Is that where Chase is?
Yes, right. It was on Palmer. Yeah, yeah. And there's pictures in the we have this collection in the digital archive of the Keresy car crash collection, which is former Chief Keresy's collection of famous car crash pictures from Larchmont. And so sometime we'll have a program about great car crashes of Larchmont. But he has a car crash in which the Larchmont Lodge is featured in the background, and you can really see it in its. We'll see his father, the first Chief Keresy, because he was involved in some of the arrests will come up. In fact, he's involved in this one. Here, this is an ad in the newspaper for the Chatsworth House, a beautiful place to dine, dance, and be entertained in the most beautiful and original dining room in the country. It's under the management of Mrs. Anna Schiffman. And actually, about 3 or 4 months earlier, her husband had died because they had done this as a couple. They had a long history of running inns. And she was very well respected. And anyway, this was a really high-class place, and she lived at 7 Roosevelt Avenue. We know this from the census. That's where her home was. So you could imagine her on Roosevelt Avenue, 2 blocks, she would go to her inn, and then she could go back to her house. This was a very successful woman who'd lost her husband, who was a very successful partner. Anyway, there was a, let me see, I have it, whoops, no I don't, but anyway, there was a raid. It was the state police initiated the raid. They found $10,000 worth of liquor. They arrested Anna Schiffman. They arrested her bartender, Edward O'Shaughnessy, and Officer Keresy, who is the first Chief Keresy when he was a police officer, assisted in the arrests. And they basically took them to jail and shut down the Chatsworth House. And you'll see in some of the later materials I show you that the Chatsworth House changed hands during 1922. So, she basically lost her business over this. And I think it's a sad thing, because I think this probably was a wonderful business person who was a very legitimate business person, and I think it was a shame that this happened. So anyway, 1921, we have the superintendent of state police describing what they expect to do with respect to enforcement. Their sense is that enforcement has been lax, and so he says that they're going to be focusing on saloons in Westchester and Oneida counties. We're going to wipe out the illicit dives which have been flourishing on the outskirts of small towns upstate. My men are going about this business in a systematic way which cannot fail but bring the result we are aiming at. We're going to get the illegally possessed liquor. We're going to get the men who sell it and the men who buy and drink it. Each county will be under constant surveillance by my men from the fact that they will pay a business visit to at least one community in each of 50 counties every week from now on. Bootlegging, moonshining, blind tigers, and all traffic in liquor in the territory covered by the state police will be entirely wiped out. So, you know, I don't know what a blind tiger is, but in any case, this is, you know, they are really serious about this, and I think, you know, we talk about one of the consequences of Prohibition was that people who had for a century been very suspicious of federal power brought on themselves direct federal enforcement of local activities. And so you had, the Volstead Act provided for concurrent federal and local law enforcement jurisdiction. And so you had competing federal agents and state agents that were attacking this problem. And so for the first time you had the federal government potentially coming to your door to arrest you. And it was a rather disturbing idea.
It says blind tiger is another name for a speakeasy.
Okay, great, all right. Now, here we had this is actually at Mamaroneck, but it's right next to the Larchmont Tennis Club. You had dry agents trap the waiter. They were dressed as tennis players, they win his confidence, and they got a pint.
Don't trust those.
And so Herman Wittenberg, who led the squad, telling the Larchmont police station of the exploit, said he whispered to the waiter at the party that the party would like something little stronger than Volstead permitted. The waiter looked them over a second time, and Wittenberg told him that he could supply them with a pint for $15. This, Wittenberg said, he thought rather high, but even for a place of such atmosphere, he consented to pay for it. And so then this was another raid. Yes.
Wasn't the Post Lodge where the Trader Joe's shopping center is now?
I don't know.
The VFW.
There's a bunch of
Right,
different
no,
lodges.
I thought there was a lodge next to it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting one here. First of all, just as an observation, the village voted to build the municipal hall across the street in 1922. Now, what does the municipal hall consist of? Well, it consists of, on the first floor, there is the fire engine apparatus floor and part of the police department. On the second floor, there is the courtroom and some village office functions. But above the fire apparatus floor, there are the company rooms. What are the company rooms? Well, if I blindfolded you and took you into one of the, the engine company, the hose company, the ladder company rooms, and then took off your blindfold and asked you where you were, I mean, if you look at that picture, that's Paul Anderson in one of the company rooms before they were renovated at the time, the village hall. But now those rooms are used for other functions, and there's a single room upstairs. But doesn't it look like a saloon? Yeah. I mean, we literally built in the middle of Prohibition 3 saloons on top of the police department right next to the courthouse. I mean, what did we think? And but I'll also, sometimes the journalism question is who, what, when, where, and why. If you wanted an admission that there was liquor being sold officially in Larchmont, this is one of the best ones. This comes from the daybook of the fire department, the 1922 daybook, where they write down everything that happens. If you get a phone call, you write it down. If there's a fire, you write it down. If you have to go send the engine out to be repaired, you write it down. Everything that happens is written down. So there's an entry by one of the career firefighters. Return to Colonial Market 1 case of beer with 2 dry bottles of ginger ale for hose company to get credit for same. Notified Captain D. Shaw of same. Now, you can't do that. And so the who is that you've got a guy signing, one of the firefighters signed it. You know that the captain of the hose company knew about it. What? Well, it was beer. Where? They went to Colonial Market. Well, I just snipped out an ad out of the newspaper for Colonial Market. Now, sometimes they have much bigger ads advertising, the price of celery and different kinds of things. But basically, that they could run over to Colonial Market and get beer for an event at upstairs in Village Hall, above the police department, next to the courthouse. So, it seems to me that it sort of crystallizes what the situation was like. So, now, next, another one of these articles. This is a newspaper article describing a shift in enforcement strategies that was going to take place in 1922. Prohibition agents think that high flyers will do their future hip-toting in this county. Roadside inns to be closely watched from now on. The idea that enforcement in New York City was placing pressure on the bootleggers, and that therefore the business was going to move up into the county, so Westchester County, and particularly the Post Road, because the Post Road was right next to the Sound. And so it was easy from Rum Row. You had lots of opportunities to bring in liquor and then get it onto the Post Road and distribute it along the Post Road. So, their principal campaign will not be directed against conditions in the larger cities and towns, but against the numerous roadhouses lining Pelham Parkway, the Boston and Albany Post Roads, and other thoroughfares leading from the city. So Larchmont is in the bullseye. Now, this is in the Larchmonter Times. This isn't in the New York Times. This is in the Larchmonter Times. This is in the local paper. So Mr. and Mrs. Larchmont are reading that they're now going to be targeted because the bootleggers are coming to Larchmont. So this is more of the article. And basically they describe 150 agents not having much success in some, but you'll see the first paragraph. The most successful rate occurred last November, when it should be Izzy Einstein and Mo Smith descended upon 34 restaurants with 105 agents. 60 arrests were made and 2 truckloads of liquor were confiscated. Now, Izzy Einstein and Mo Smith will meet later. Those names are important. But what we're going to do next is to spend a little bit of time with a cartoon that appeared in the Larchmonter Times. So this is a local cartoon in 1922 that sort of described the situation in Larchmont and basically responded to this article. If the bootleggers were coming to Larchmont, what's the story here? Now, this was done by a cartoonist, last name is Van Zelm, and his line of work during that period of time was that he would do commercial cartoons. He would do a series of cartoons for a community that featured the Chamber of Commerce cast of characters, the businesses. So the real estate agents and the restaurants and the gas stations all appeared in the cartoon, but the focus of the cartoon would be on some event. And sometime, well, some Sunday afternoon, we need to look at all the cartoons, because there's some fabulous ones. There's one about Engine 1, about the fire department's new engine running out of gas on the way to a fire, because they'd always had horses. And the idea that they were going to have a newfangled engine with gas, and what would happen if it ran out of gas, and how would they get the gas? And they've got everybody running around trying to get gasoline to put into the engine. They also have one, because Village Hall was built on rock, they had to dynamite the site to make to make the basement for Village Hall. And so they had all of the chaos breaking out in the business district as they dynamited Village Hall. But anyway, let's look at the first cartoon. This is a focus. I'm just focusing on different parts of it. But you'll see over here the little sign that says Larchmont Lodge, formerly Chatsworth Inn. This is the Larchmont Lodge that got raided, now is sold to someone else, has been renamed, and Mrs. Shipment is you know, who knows where, who knows what. But now the site of this, and we can look at this, this is actually right out here. That's the Post Road running sideways, and running north-south is Chatsworth Avenue. So this is Larchmont. This is really Larchmont. It's not a theoretical place. And so then, here's a little more detail. They actually name the people in it. So here we have Police Chief Bill Hines is spreading nails in front of the bootleggers. You know, the bootleggers are coming. We have to deal with this. And Gus Anthus fires on the bootleggers from behind a streetlight. Now, 4 more of Larchmont's finest are deployed on the roofs of stores, including Officer Gene Marshall. One resident is apparently firing a water pistol from an upper window. Several more officers, Ken Ireland, Ollie Cochran, Frank Johnson, they name them all, respond from a side street. Versure is preparing to fire a small cannon. You can see him in the lower right-hand corner. He's going to fire a cannon at the, and someone's got a shotgun. And but this is certainly, we're definitely having a forceful response to the bootleggers. Now, Bill Keresy he's eventually Chief Keresy, the first chief. But here he's an officer. He's trying to lasso one of the bootleggers, but he instead lassos one of the local residents. Officer O'Laughlin is firing backwards and hitting Jacob Severin. This is Severin's, the store. This is Jacob of Severin's, the stationery store. And this actually didn't happen. Nobody ever shot him. But they're showing just all sorts of chaos from the local police trying to deal with the bootleggers. Now, you can see up above, some people are desperately thirsty, and they're hanging out of a window up in there trying to get at some of the liquor. And then one lady, you can see her in the upper story of the building, is dropping a flower pot on the head of one of our police officers below. They're just, not, as you can see, this level of support for enforcement of prohibition is modest.
Wasn't this also a time when the Keystone Cops were very popular? So I think probably it would be sort of the bumbling policeman
was a theme that would be well received, yeah. So then you can see in this last clip, the liquor starts to leak out of the back of the truck. And so then you can see, like, the first Larchmonter is reaching up out of a manhole with a soup ladle. And then another one is just on his hands and knees licking the street. And the next guy's got a straw. And then someone further up has got some sort of a broom or a vacuum cleaner or something, but they're all trying to get at the liquor. So you can see that the level of enforcement of alcohol prohibition is limited.
Is that supposed to be the post road that they're on?
I think so.
Because I thought Zevins was on the other side of the street.
Well, you know, Van Zelm never placed the stores logically where they are. He would basically focus on his central situation and then arrange, because it was only the stores that paid would get in it, and so basically he would then arrange them, and I would imagine that if you paid a little more, you got a little bigger, you know, and if you didn't, you got out in the corner, or whatever. Now here, this is from the Larchmont Times. If you remember, we have the Rum Row. We have the big supply of boats, and how does the liquor get from the big ships out at Rum Row back to the community? And so here we have what I think is a local delivery. I think that this was being intentionally delivered to this particular home, and the police interceded and discovered it, because you'll notice that in the bottom it says the other men were promptly discharged as they could not be held according to Judge Schaefer's ruling, as they were arrested on private property. In other words, the owner of the property didn't want to charge anything. You know, the owner of the property was not cooperating with this. They did arrest 2 people, and liquor in the amount of $100,000 was confiscated, and this was on the beach off of one of the expensive homes at the hummocks, you know, in the hummocks area. So you can see, you know, that there's a lot going on in a lot of spots. Now, this is Izzy and Mo. Well, Izzy and Mo were fearsome people. Izzy Einstein was the lead prohibition agent responsible for Larchmont. Now, he was responsible for a much larger area than this, but Izzy Einstein he's scared. You'll see, he has people fainting when they discover that he comes into their place. And Izzy basically was very good at coming in. He would pose as one kind of person or another. He was very good at adopting the appearance of people in a community, and then, you know, pretending to be whoever he needed to be, and then he would get them to sell him liquor, and then he was always saying, well, I have sad news for you. And then he would reveal who he is. And so here they went to New Rochelle, and I'll show you an interesting thing about this, but this was 180 Main Street. Well, you can see this is Five Island. Okay, you can see, I'm going to step out of the picture for a moment, but out of the TV. Five Island Park is like here. And up here is 180 Main Street, and right now it's like so 180 Main Street is like the car dealerships that are just before you take the road to go into Five Island, just before Salesian High School. And so basically what Izzy was saying, well, you'll note that if you look at the little red dot, there is an inlet of water that finds its way right up really close to the little red dot. And so this is basically a destination for a rum runner that delivers to the Roth House. And so this is Izzy's book. He wrote an autobiography, and he wrote about this very event. And he says, the Combination Inn and Cabaret, located at 180 Main Street, New Rochelle, the town that was 45 minutes from Broadway, according to George M. Cohen some years ago, but is only a half an hour now, had facilities such as few hotels were able to offer or even think up. That is to say, it fronted on the Boston Post Road for the convenience of motorists, and still thinking of them, had at its back a small inlet of Long Island Sound, which made possible the landing of liquor right off the boat. Hence, you might call it a wayside filling station that could never be emptied because of its unlimited supply. Anxious to study the wonders of this unique establishment, I arrived there, bag and baggage, in the guise of a wealthy real estate man. Took the best suite they had, saying I didn't know how long I'd stay. It depended on a deal I was putting through. Meanwhile, my interest in real estate prompted me to cast a professional eye around the hotel itself. I noticed that the bar was quite a good piece of architecture, well varnished, well kept up, and apparently quite ably operated by a Negro bartender. When I let this colored gentleman know whom he had sold liquor to, he fainted. So I knew from the other cases where such a thing had happened that there must be a good-sized hoard on the premises, and sure enough, I found down in the basement a secret room containing $25,000 worth. And so this is Izzy Einstein comes to New Rochelle, and in the guise of a mild-mannered real estate agent, succeeds in raiding that establishment. Now here's another. This is an instance where there's a major ring up in Portchester, and once again, it's a ring that's related to the rum runners because we're so close to the water. And then here is in the New York Times, they describe the indictment of George Scotty Clyde, who lives at 15 Woodland Avenue in Larchmont, but said to be Coron's partner in the marine garage where much liquor was alleged to have been landed. So he's a co-conspirator in a major indictment. Now, the next one is an interesting one to consider. This is in 1927, a rather innocent article describing an event, a hose company beefsteak. A beefsteak is a dinner where they have a lot of beef, and in the days before Prohibition, a lot of booze. And so it was a kind of an annual event. But what's interesting here is they refer to they introduce the idea that they have a chaplain. And they explain that the mantle has fallen on the shoulders of Albert B. Weeman, but he is not really, he's not a local minister, he's not a rabbi, he's just one of the members. Now, you know, if I announced to you that the Historical Society was going to have a social event, and it was going to be led by the Historical Society's new chaplain, you probably would say that this might not be an event you want to go to, particularly if the chaplain's not a chaplain in any organized way, but is simply one of the board members that we designated to be the chaplain. So what's going on here? Well, what they mean in this article to people who at the time is that the sacramental wine thing. That basically the chaplain is going to be engaging the hose company in a ceremony which necessarily would involve the consumption of liquor, and that because this person was a chaplain, this would be permitted. Now, that's not, it wouldn't be permitted, but I think that the whole idea of this is that they're sort of lightly suggesting, wink, 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 that everybody knows that what this is all about is going to be a boozing event. Then now we have some articles in 1928 on some injunctions of places nearby. They're all but these places are being closed down for 6 months to a year because of liquor violations. Then this is one I like. Particularly, I think if some of the Larchmont trustees came, they always have these issues with the town assessor. Well, in this particular situation, the town assessor at the time, William Carey, was renting out the Larchmont Gables garage, which is it's a big apartment building on the Post Road on the way to on the north side of the Post Road on the way to toward Mamaroneck. Anyway, what they discovered was a whole lot of beer being stored in the garage. And in this little part here, they say, well, where did he say it? He said it, yeah, he said it in this other part over here. Town Assessor William Carey, who rents the garage for automobile storage space, said he did not know who owned the alleged contraband, but admitting knowing that barreled liquids had been stored there similarly in the past. Well, if he's the one who's responsible for renting this out, one might assume that he actually knows who this belongs to because he would have rented the space. So anyway, we then have, in the next slide, 1933, a Larchmont vote on repeal. And it's overwhelming. What's interesting is that basically 95% of the voters voted in favor of repealing Prohibition. So, people were sick and tired of this. 96% voted for it in the village of Mamaroneck. They were even more assertively in favor of it. The unincorporated area, only about 91% voted for it, so that they were a little bit more tentative. Larchmont, it was 95% voted in favor of it. There was another 1926 referendum in which it was 76% of the people voted that they would prefer to have Prohibition repealed. And so by the end of Prohibition, there was an overwhelming opinion that this should be done. So then we have some permits being issued now for restaurants, and Rudolph Schaefer, a local resident, announces that the F&M Schaefer Brewing Company is going to go back into the large-scale production of beer. And then we have stores reopening and saying, after a 14-year lapse, we're now able to provide you with the things that you want. Larchmont Lodge is going to have a special dinner, which would include liquor. And then an interesting one is an article about the Larchmont Yacht Club, in which at the very bottom in the right, they say, the manager of the yacht club admitted reluctantly that the famous row of straps over the club's bar would not return to their old-time use tonight, meaning that there wouldn't be any more beer, any liquor yet. These straps, like those used in trolley cars, are hooked around the left wrist of celebrants who, thus supported, then drink with their right hands. In this manner, no matter how much weaving and bobbing is done, the actual loss of equilibrium becomes impossible. Now, I suspect that this is also possibly what is the result of it's simply an imitation of a steamship. If you're on the ocean, you might need to. Anyway, we're now going to go over to Larchmont to Post Wine and Spirits, and these are quickly pictures of Post Wine and Spirits in 1925. It was a Flint car dealership at the time. Then here it is in the 1940s. You can see it's the liquor store. Here it is 1930 and 1952 in advertisements in fire department booklets. And then we have a couple more pictures. And we're going to go over there now because they are going to treat us to a taste of the post-Prohibition Pinot Noir, their new local label, celebrating 80 years of service as one of Larchmont's liquor stores since the day that Prohibition ended. Thank you.